We are talking about the horror comedy, The Night Sitter. This one is directed by Abiel Bruhn and John Rocco, and this one stars Elyse Dufour, who you may know from AMC's The Walking Dead TV series, where she played a character called Frankie. Now, I watched The Walking Dead, I gotta be honest, I don't actually remember her character in that show, so it must have been a relatively kind of minor part, but there it is. She has been in multiple episodes along with a bunch of other stuff. So this is one of these kind of retro throwback style movies. Now, it is not set in the 80s or the 90s, but it is definitely influenced by films of that era. For example, the soundtrack is very kind of synth heavy and will remind you of, horror films of that period. And it is definitely influenced by a whole host of horror movies from the past, and even some kind of more recent ones. I watched a real movie recently called Close Calls, and I think this is a comparable film to this one. So what is the story? So we focus on this young girl played by Elyse Dufour called Amber. Now she is, or at least appears to be, a young babysitter looking for work, and she is hired by this single father who has lost his wife a year previous. And this guy is actually like a paranormal investigator, a la the Warrens from The Conjuring, a film that we're going to be referencing again. And he's basically wants to go off on a date with his kind of new girlfriend, who also has this young boy, the same age as his son. So Amber is hired to look after these two young lads. Now this guy collects all sorts of kind of like paranormal artifacts, very much like the Warrens and the Conjuring films. And however, this girl has got ulterior motives. Amber is actually a con woman, and she actually wants to rob this house blind with kind of a bunch of friends that she's kind of got waiting in the wings. So inevitably that's what happens, and they unwittingly unleash three horrible witches that will kind of want to tear a swathe through everyone in the house. So let's discuss The Night Sitter. This is a lot of fun. It is a kind of horror comedy. We'll come on to that again, but what worked for this movie? First of all, I thought the characters, and we're going to come on to that again as well, were a lot of fun. All the characters here are very kind of, a little bit OTT, very well defined. There's actually one character who I thought was quite funny, who is like this caricature nice guy, who is like this, like, you see it like one of these guys who seem like they're kind of self-confessed, why doesn't anyone love me, but they actually come across as a little creepy. I kind of knew someone who was like that, and it's fun to kind of see that kind of that explored a little bit on screen. But all the characters here are a lot of fun. Like I say, a little bit larger than life, a little bit OTT. Amber obviously gets kind of the most screen time, and she's kind of our central character, and is somewhat kind of like portrayed as a little bit unlikable, to be honest, because she is a con woman. But obviously she ultimately develops a kind of a bond with this kid. I thought the kid actors were quite fun as well. I thought they did a good job here of kind of not being annoying, or at least not unintentionally. Well, there's one of the kids is meant to be a little bit like that, but I think he plays it kind of to a good standard. The movie rattles along at a good pace. This is kind of a pretty exciting, and lots happens within this movie, and I actually thought the pacing of this movie was actually fantastic. The threat is building, and the kind of like the levels of kind of violence gradually increase as the movie progresses. The movie also doesn't shy away from violence. I was actually, without kind of spoiling anything, there's a character death in this movie. I was very surprised that they went there, to be honest with you, in this movie. I was almost expecting to kind of like, oh, it didn't really happen, but it did. There's also some fantastic gore effects here that are, again, because this is just kind of like a throwback movie, there's a lot of practical effects, heads getting kind of smashed open, things like that. They do use a little bit of kind of visual effects on the kind of the witches to kind of make them seem a little bit more ethereal, but I felt it worked for this kind of movie. This is not a massively effects-driven movie, but what they do use, I feel, works kind of well here. The actual tone of the film, I would say, is, it reminds me of Evil Dead 2. If you call that a horror comedy, then this is kind of that. I wouldn't say it's necessarily a comedy per se. It has a comedic edge to it, but not necessarily a comedy. Now, how would I best describe this film in a nutshell? I would say this is The Conjuring meets Adventures in Babysitting. That would be my logline for this movie, because I feel, you have this setup with this paranormal investigator, who has got all this stuff, and then, it's very much like that sort of setup, but we have obviously this babysitter looking after these kids. It's kind of, you can mash those two together and this is your movie. I'd also say it's influenced by a number of other films. I was reminded of The Gate, obviously an early Stephen Dorff movie, because that was very kind of child focused, and the children do play a big part in this movie. And then more recent movies, obviously you've got The Babysitter, but I've already mentioned kind of Close Calls, and that was kind of a similar feel. Now the movie is very stylized. The directors here have a very kind of stylistic vision for the film. Some of the camera works here are kind of, there's lots of long takes that kind of like go through the house and things like this. The colour palette is very kind of saturated, kind of gives it kind of somewhat of an artificial feel. That may be a taste thing for some people, because it definitely has a calling card visual style that may put some people off. I actually quite enjoyed it for this movie, I've got to say, but it does show some kind of obviously some directorial flourish from the kind of the characters, from the directors here. But I would understand if people would maybe want a little bit more subtlety in their films, because this movie is not necessarily subtle. But it's a lot of fun overall. I mean, this is like, the soundtrack is fantastic, the practical gore effects are great. I thought the actual witches were very, very menacing, and they kind of wear these kind of like these masks. I was expecting them to take them off and have this crap makeup behind, but that, you know, thankfully that doesn't happen. They're portrayed as to be genuinely kind of threatening. The characters are a lot of fun. As I said, there's a whole host. There's far more than I was expecting, and all very kind of individual, so that was great. Very much a kind of a throwback to so many films. I mean, if you've kind of watched stuff like Night of the Demons, and as I've already mentioned, kind of maybe like the Evil Dead 2 specifically, that kind of thing. What doesn't work, I gotta be honest with you, I don't have too many real criticisms here. I feel the tone of the film may not be for everything, but that's not necessarily a criticism, more of a taste issue, because I do feel this is, you know, people may want a more serious horror film, and this movie, although not comedic, it kind of straddles that line between being a straight horror film with kind of just veering on OTT a little bit to kind of just give it this kind of like hyper real kind of feel. The only thing I would say, which maybe is a legitimate criticism in my opinion, is the actual characters themselves. Although fun and very kind of memorable, they are cliches, all of them, including Amber. So every one of the characters has pretty much one character trait, and that is it. So we don't see any depth in the actual characters. Now that is I should think it's possibly a choice by obviously the filmmakers here, and giving the kind of like the tone of this movie, obviously being somewhat kind of comedic. But nonetheless, they do see very much caricatures rather than characters. I mean, Amber gets kind of the most amount of development in her character, her kind of relationship with the kind of the young son. But even her, she's somewhat unlikable, I've got to say, at the beginning of the movie, because we know that she's a con artist. But I feel they do a good enough job, at least with her, to kind of give her some type of redemption. But everyone else really is just a caricature that has one type of personality trait, and that is it. And the only other thing I would say, this film is a lot of fun, but maybe it's not particularly original. Maybe that's not necessarily a bad thing, but it's so influenced by so many other horror films. To me, I didn't necessarily mind that. I thought it was a good approximation of a lot of different kind of like horror influences. But maybe, yeah, it's not particularly original, but maybe it doesn't have to be. I would say that. But overall, this movie is a lot of fun. This is a ball-busting kind of adventure. It's a romp, it's a horror romp. This is how I would describe it. I would definitely recommend this, guys, if it sounds like something you're interested in. If you're more of the straight, you're kind of like your Hostels and stuff like that, then maybe this isn't going to be the movie for you. But if you like like I've mentioned, Night of the Demons, Evil Dead 2, Fright Night, stuff like that, then this is going to be the one for you, I feel, as a kind of a companion piece to them. I'm going to give this one 8 out of 10. I really enjoyed this one. I'm going to be definitely looking out for a media book or something for it in the future. Have you seen it? What did you think of it? Leave me a comment. I look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.